When was the last time someone, a friend, a sister, a mentor, anyone actually sat down with you and taught you the real difference between touching a man and truly triggering him? Not just grazing his skin, not just going through familiar motions, but actually unlocking something deep inside his nervous system that he cannot control, cannot predict, and absolutely cannot forget? If you're like most women, the answer is never, and that is not your fault. Here's what nobody tells you. There is a massive science-backed difference between a touch that simply registers and a touch that completely overwhelms. Most women spend years, sometimes entire relationships, operating exclusively in the first category. They touch, they caress, they try, and their partners feel it, sure. But feeling it and unraveling because of it are two completely different experiences living on completely opposite ends of the pleasure spectrum. The secret that most women never learn is this: your fingers alone are not the problem. How you're using them is flat fingertips dragging across skin creates surface sensation. That surface sensation, no matter how fast or how slow you go, has a ceiling. It plateaus. It becomes predictable. And the moment your touch becomes predictable, his nervous system quietly files it under familiar input and stops fully responding to it. That's the gap nobody talks about. That's the knowledge that separates women who are good from women who are genuinely, deeply, unforgettably incredible. Today, that gap closes for you. What you're about to learn isn't something passed around in casual conversation. It's rooted in how the human nervous system actually processes pressure, depth, and unpredictability. And when you understand these principles, everything changes. Stay with me, because this is the foundation for everything that follows. Why good enough is actually boring his brain. Here's a piece of neuroscience that will completely reframe the way you think about intimacy. Your partner's nervous system is actively working against repetitive touch. This isn't about attraction. This isn't about desire. This is pure biology, and it's called sensory adaptation. According to research published in peer-reviewed neuroscience literature, sensory systems automatically reduce their responsiveness to constant repeated stimulation. When your brain encounters the same input again and again, the same pressure, the same rhythm, the same direction of movement, it classifies that input as non-threatening background noise and begins tuning it out. Scientists have confirmed this across every sensory system: hearing, smell, sight, and critically, for our purposes today, touch. The skin contains two types of touch receptors: fast-adapting receptors that stop firing almost immediately when stimulation becomes repetitive, and slow-adapting receptors that maintain some response but still diminish significantly over time. What this means in plain language is that your go-to back-and-forth finger motion, no matter how well-intentioned, is actively being suppressed by his own nervous system the longer you repeat it. Think of it like this: imagine a song playing quietly in the background of a coffee shop. At first you notice it, then within minutes your brain filters it out completely. You stop consciously hearing it. That same neurological filtering mechanism is exactly what happens when touch becomes too familiar, too rhythmic, and too predictable. This is why good enough is, biologically speaking, keeping him from experiencing the full depth of what's possible. You're not doing anything wrong. You're simply using a tool that his nervous system has learned to expect. And expected things don't make people shake. That's why today you're going to learn something his nervous system has absolutely no defense against: the shake response, what it really means. Before we go any further, let's talk about the specific result this method is designed to create, because understanding why it happens will help you understand exactly how to make it happen with precision. When a person trembles or shakes involuntarily during intense physical experience, what you're witnessing is not performance. It is not exaggeration. It is a genuine, measurable neurological event. The shake response occurs when the nervous system becomes simultaneously overloaded with intense sensory input and releases accumulated muscular tension through involuntary motor discharge. In simple terms, his body receives more sensation than his conscious mind can regulate, so it bypasses the control system entirely and responds on its own. This can manifest as micro tremors in the thighs, shaking in the core, involuntary hip movement, or full body shuddering. All of these are signs of the same thing. His parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems are both activated at peak levels, and his body is communicating that fact whether he intends to show it or not. What makes the shake response so significant beyond the obvious is that it requires a very specific combination of triggers: deep pressure that reaches below the skin's surface, unpredictable timing that the nervous system cannot adapt to, and sustained intensity that builds faster than his body can regulate. Casual, surface-level touching, doesn't produce this. Repetitive rubbing definitely doesn't produce this. But the hook method, built precisely around these three neurological requirements, creates exactly the right conditions for this response repeatedly and reliably. By the end of this video, you won't just understand what the shake response is. You'll know exactly how to call it up on command, the psychology behind intense pleasure. To truly appreciate why the hook method works so differently from what most women do instinctively, you need to understand a fundamental distinction in how touch actually works beneath the skin's surface. When you use flat fingertips to touch someone, the primary receptors being engaged are located in the outermost layers of the epidermis and dermis, particularly the Meissner's corpuscles and Merkel's discs. These receptors are exquisitely sensitive to light touch, but as we already established, they are also the fastest to adapt. They habituate quickly, meaning the signal they send to the brain weakens with repetition. Now contrast that with what happens when you apply deep pressure using a curved, structured hand, one with real form and firmness behind it. Deep pressure stimulation reaches the Ruffini endings and Pacinian corpuscles, which are embedded far deeper in the subcutaneous tissue. These receptors respond to sustained compression, stretching of connective tissue, and pressure applied across a broader surface area. They connect directly to longer-lasting neural responses. Beyond the skin, deep pressure activates proprioceptive nerve pathways, the same system that tells your brain where your body is in space. This is why deep pressure feels grounding, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. The hook method is engineered specifically to access these deeper receptor layers. It bypasses the surface entirely and speaks directly to the nervous system in a language that is far more difficult to tune out. Depth creates intensity. Intensity creates response. And that response is precisely what you're here to master. The anticipation and unpredictability factor. There's a psychological principle at work in the most intense pleasurable experiences that most people never consciously recognize. The brain is wired to find unpredictability electrifying. This isn't a metaphor, it is neurochemical fact. When your brain cannot predict what's coming next, it floods the system with dopamine in anticipation. Dopamine, often called the reward chemical, is actually more accurately described as the anticipation chemical. It spikes in response to uncertainty far more than it does in response to certain reward. This is the same mechanism behind why gambling is addictive, why the almost kiss is sometimes more thrilling than the kiss itself, and why a surprise is more exciting than a planned gift. Repetitive touch, no matter how technically skilled, eliminates this chemical surge entirely. When he knows exactly what pressure is coming, in what direction, at what speed, his dopamine system is essentially offline. His brain has categorized the input. The magic is gone, not because of anything wrong with either of you, but because predictability is neurologically boring by design. The hook method's unique pressure patterns, pauses, and directional changes create what neuroscientists call biological unpredictability, a stimulus his nervous system genuinely cannot pre-process. Every application feels new. Every drag, every pause, every pulse arrives before his brain has finished registering the last one. This keeps the dopamine system fully engaged, the body on high alert, and the intensity building in a way that simply cannot happen with rhythmic, predictable touch. Unpredictability isn't cruelty. In the right hands, it is the most powerful intimacy tool you will ever hold. Why confidence amplifies everything. Here is something that no technique tutorial will tell you, and it might be the most important thing in this entire video. Technique is multiplied by energy. The exact same physical motion performed with hesitation produces a fundamentally different result than when it's performed with absolute certainty and intention. His nervous system doesn't just register your touch, it registers your state. Research in interpersonal neurobiology shows that emotional states are genuinely contagious. When you are anxious, tentative, or worried about whether you're doing something correctly, that energy transmits through the quality of your touch. Your pressure becomes inconsistent, your breathing changes, your grip loses its structure. His nervous system picks up on all of this subconsciously, and his body responds by contracting rather than surrendering. But when you move with confidence, when your hands know exactly what they're doing, and your presence communicates absolute certainty, something entirely different happens. His nervous system receives a clear, unambiguous signal: trust this, surrender to this. And that neurological trust is what creates the full openness necessary for the shake response to emerge. Before you apply a single technique from this video, make an internal commitment to own every movement you make. You are not asking his body to respond, you are telling it to. Confidence is not arrogance, it is clarity, and in the language of touch, clarity is everything. The hook method will give you the technique, your confidence will give it the power. Together, they become something he will never, ever be able to walk away from. The hook method revealed complete technique breakdown, the hand configuration, creating the C shape. All right, let's get into it. This is what you've been waiting for, so I want to be very precise because hand configuration is the absolute foundation of everything. If you get the shape wrong, the entire technique loses its structural integrity, and that means it loses its power. So pay close attention. Begin by holding your dominant hand out in front of you, palm facing upward, fingers extended. Now, instead of keeping your fingers flat and relaxed, I want you to create a deliberate curve. Curl your fingers slightly inward from the knuckles, not into a fist and not into a claw, but into a firm, intentional C shape, as if you're loosely holding a large grapefruit. Your thumb should be gently extended or tucked, and the heel of your palm should remain broad and stable. This is critical. The C shape must be held with structure or integrity. That means your fingers are not limp or soft inside the curve. They are firm, engaged, and maintaining their shape against resistance. Think of it the way a physical therapist holds a joint, purposeful, stable, deliberate. The firmness of this hand shape is what allows you to access those deeper pressure receptors we discussed. Soft fingers flatten out and skim the surface. A structured C creates focused, consistent, deep pressure contact across the entire curved surface of your hand. The difference between this and what most women do instinctively is enormous. Flat fingertip touch distributes very little force and creates almost no depth of contact. The C shape applied with intention concentrates pressure across the entire curved palm to finger line and drives it inward into the tissue, into the muscle, into the deeper nerve pathways that don't habituate quickly. Practice forming this shape right now. Before you continue, flex your hand into the curve, hold it, feel the structural firmness in your knuckles and palm. That firmness is the source of everything this technique delivers. The C also has an important secondary function. It allows you to hook specific anatomical contours of his body, whether that's the curve of an inner thigh, the ridge of a shoulder muscle, or the shape of the lower abdomen. Your hand is designed to lock onto these contours and create traction, which is exactly what the next motion requires. The drag, don't rub motion. Now that your hand is correctly formed, it's time to understand what makes the actual movement of the hook method so fundamentally different from conventional touch. And this distinction is everything. The instruction is deceptively simple. Drag, don't rub. Rubbing is what most women default to. Rubbing is fast, repetitive, back and forth movement designed to generate friction over a wide surface area. It feels productive because it involves a lot of movement and a lot of energy. But here is the problem. Rubbing moves faster than his skin receptors can process each individual stimulus, so the sensations blur together into a single blunt signal. The nervous system reads it as sustained noise rather than distinct, intense sensation. The more you rub, the more his body adapts, and the more the feeling plateaus. Dragging is the opposite in every meaningful way. To execute the drag, place your C-shaped hand firmly against the target area and pull slowly in a single direction against the grain of the skin, creating traction rather than simply sliding over the surface. Think of the difference between brushing leaves off a table and dragging a comb slowly through tangled hair. To one skims, the other grips and moves through resistance. That resistance is the key. When you drag with a firm, structured hand, you are creating a multi-layered stimulus, surface friction, deep tissue compression, and the stretching of connective tissue all at once. These three simultaneous signals overload the brain's sensory processing in the best possible way. The nervous system cannot collapse all of that into background noise because each layer arrives as a separate, distinct signal. The pace of the drag matters enormously. Slow is the operative word. Think 3 to 5 seconds per drag. Pull, hold the grip, let the skin move with your hand, let the tissue compress under your fingers. Give his body time to register every millimeter of movement. This slow deliberateness is the exact opposite of what he expects, and that violation of expectation is precisely what makes it impossible to ignore. One single slow drag performed correctly will produce more nervous system response than 30 seconds of fast rubbing. Trust the slowness. It is doing far more than speed ever could. The pause and pulse rhythm. If the C shape is the foundation and the drag is the engine, then the pause and pulse is the detonator. This is the timing element that separates an intense experience from an absolutely overwhelming one, and it is the specific mechanism most responsible for producing the full shake response. Here is how the complete sequence works. You hook, you drag, and then at the moment of maximum tension and grip, you stop completely. Not gradually slow down, not ease up. You stop with full intention, maintaining the same firm pressure exactly where you are. Hold it, don't move, just apply steady static pressure at the end point of the drag. This pause creates something neurologically extraordinary. When movement suddenly ceases, but pressure is maintained, the nervous system enters a state of heightened anticipation. The sensory receptors that were firing rapidly during the drag don't simply turn off, they remain alert, waiting. Dopamine surges in the gap. His body doesn't know whether the next sensation will be another drag, a release, or something entirely new. That uncertainty, while under sustained pressure, is an exquisite form of controlled overwhelm. After holding the static pressure for 2 to 5 seconds, you introduce the pulse, a gentle but deliberate rhythmic microcompression. Rather than releasing and beginning a new drag immediately, you apply a slow, intentional squeeze and release pattern, 3 to 4 times directly in place. These microcompressions are tiny movements, but they arrive at a nervous system that is already at peak sensitivity from the drag and the pause. The effect is exponentially greater than if you had applied the same pulses without the buildup. The complete hook, drag, pause, pulse rhythm is what creates the cumulative overload that triggers the shake response. Each cycle builds on the last. Each repetition arrives before his nervous system has fully processed the previous one. The tension accumulates, the anticipation compounds, and eventually, inevitably, his body has no choice but to release it all in the form of the involuntary trembling that tells you, without any words, that you have reached somewhere his conscious mind cannot follow. Strategic application. Where and when beyond the obvious. Multiple target zones. One of the most powerful aspects of the hook method is its remarkable versatility. This isn't a single location technique. It's a full body language that you can apply across multiple areas to create layered, escalating experiences that he will feel in places he never expected. Let's talk about the primary target zones beyond the ones you typically default to. The inner thighs are one of the most powerful areas for the hook method because of their dense concentration of sensory nerves and their proximity to major blood vessel pathways. The skin here is thinner, the tissue more sensitive, and the muscles respond dramatically to deep pressure drag in a way that creates immediate, noticeable physical reactions. Apply your C grip to the middle inner thigh and drag slowly upward. You will feel the muscle beneath respond almost immediately. The base of the neck and the posterior shoulders are extraordinary locations for the hook method because of both their sensitivity and their connection to tension holding patterns. Most people chronically hold muscular tension in this area, and a slow, firm hook drag along the trapezius ridge releases both physical tension and nervous energy simultaneously, creating a rush of relaxation pleasure that radiates downward through the spine. The lower stomach, particularly the area between the hip bones, is laced with nerve pathways that connect directly to deeper arousal centers. A slow, firm C-shaped drag applied here, moving inward and slightly downward, creates a deep, visceral response that feels entirely different from surface caressing. Finally, the lateral chest and rib cage respond powerfully to the hook's deep pressure capability, engaging the intercostal muscles and creating a breathing-related sensation of intensity that amplifies everything else you're doing. Each zone builds the picture. Each application tells the same message in a different dialect of sensation. The vagus nerve connection. Here's where things get truly fascinating, and where the hook method steps from simple technique into genuine physiological mastery. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the human body, running from the brainstem down through the neck, chest, and into the abdomen. It is the primary highway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for rest, relaxation, digestion, and critically for our purposes, arousal and full body surrender. Research published in neuroscience and sexual health literature confirms that vagal tone, the level of activity in the vagus nerve, is directly correlated with the capacity for pleasure, relaxation into intimacy and orgasmic response. Higher vagal tone means greater ability to fully experience and release into intense physical sensation. Low vagal tone means the nervous system stays guarded, tensed, and unable to fully let go. When you apply the hook method to the neck, specifically the lateral aspect of the neck running from below the ear toward the collarbone and to the sternum and chest area, you are applying deep pressure directly over or alongside vagal nerve pathways. Research from Cedars-Sinai and other institutions confirms that gentle to moderate deep pressure in these areas stimulates the vagus nerve, triggering a cascade of parasympathetic activation, heart rate regulation, muscle relaxation, and an opening of the full body pleasure response. In practical terms, this means that using the hook method in these specific locations doesn't just create localized sensation, it actually shifts his entire nervous system toward a state of deeper openness and receptivity. His whole body becomes more responsive, more capable of sensation, more available for the overload that produces the shake response. You're not just touching him, you are reconfiguring his physiology, reading his response signals. A technique only reaches its full potential when it becomes a conversation rather than a performance. The hook method is powerful precisely because it creates clear, readable responses in the body, and learning to interpret these signals in real time allows you to customize the experience with a level of mastery that feels almost psychic. Watch his breathing first. When you find optimal pressure and positioning, breathing will shift from regular and controlled to slower and deeper, or alternatively to shorter and more arrested breaths. Either pattern tells you that his nervous system has engaged at a deeper level. Shallow, quick breath holds. The brief catches in his breathing are particularly telling. They indicate that sensation has surpassed what his conscious regulation can quietly manage. Observe muscular tension patterns across his body. When the hook method is working at full effectiveness, you'll notice a paradoxical sequence. Muscles initially increase in tension, tightening in response to intense stimulus, and then, after the pause and pulse cycle, release into a visible softening or trembling. This tension-release pattern is exactly what you're building toward. If muscles stay consistently rigid and don't fluctuate, you need to adjust pressure, either increase depth or slow the drag pace further. Pay attention to skin responses. Goosebumps appearing even in warm temperatures indicate intense nervous system activation. Notice the involuntary movement of his hips or core, small, uncontrolled micro-adjustments that signal his body is beginning to respond outside of his conscious direction. These are your metrics. They tell you when to hold steady, when to intensify, when to introduce a new zone, and when you've arrived at the precise combination that makes everything fall apart beautifully. Chapter 5. Psychological Amplifiers, Mental Hooking, Eye Contact Synchronization. There is something about being truly seen in a moment of vulnerability that amplifies physical sensation in ways that no additional technique can replicate. Eye contact during intimate moments is not just a romantic gesture, it is a neurological amplifier with very real, measurable effects on both participants. When you maintain deliberate, steady eye contact while applying the hook method, you force a mutual state of presence that eliminates psychological escape. His mind cannot wander. He cannot retreat into his head. He is here in this moment, fully aware of both what you are doing and the fact that you are watching him experience it. This psychological exposure, being witnessed in pleasure, creates a specific kind of vulnerability that actually intensifies physical sensation. Research in interpersonal neurobiology, notably the work of Alan Shaw and Daniel Siegel on right brain to right brain communication, suggests that sustained eye contact between intimately connected individuals creates genuine neurological synchronization, a co-regulation of nervous system states. You are not simply performing a technique on him, you are pulling his entire nervous system into alignment with your intention. You become the conductor, and his body becomes the instrument. From a practical standpoint, maintain soft, confident eye contact, not an intimidating stare, but the kind of gaze that communicates, I see exactly what I'm doing to you. Hold it through the drag, hold it through the pause, let him see in your eyes that you are completely aware of his response. This witnessing effect doubles the psychological intensity of everything your hands are doing, and it creates a profoundly intimate vulnerability that bonds the experience to you specifically in his nervous system's memory. Verbal anchoring and power language. Your voice is a tool you are almost certainly underusing during intimate moments, and that represents a significant opportunity. Specific, well-chosen words spoken at precisely the right moment don't just fill silence, they create psychological feedback loops that intensify physical sensation and anchor his experience directly to your presence. The principle at work here is called verbal anchoring. When you name what's happening in his body, when you describe his response back to him with confidence, you do two powerful things simultaneously. First, you bring his conscious attention to the physical sensation, which intensifies his awareness of it. Second, you demonstrate that you are completely in control, completely aware, and completely certain of the effect you're having. This confirmation of your power in the moment creates a psychological submission that deepens his physical response. Here are specific phrases that work with tremendous effectiveness during the hook method. As he begins to respond to the drag, say quietly and confidently, "There it is." 3 words. They communicate that you expected this response, that you planned it, and that you are watching it unfold exactly as intended. As the trembling begins, try, "I can feel you shaking for me," which both acknowledges his response and claims it as yours. During the pause phase, a whispered "stay right there" creates a command dynamic that makes the static pressure feel like both restraint and permission simultaneously. These phrases work best when delivered quietly, slowly, and without any hint of uncertainty. The tone matters as much as the words. Speak from your chest, not your throat. Let the words land like the touch itself, deliberate, certain, and absolutely in command. The combination of skilled hands and precise verbal anchoring creates an experience that overwhelms multiple sensory and psychological channels simultaneously. That multi-channel overwhelm is what makes you impossible to forget. The power dynamic shift. I want to offer you a reframe that may completely change not just how you use the hook method, but how you approach intimacy as a whole. Most women, even confident, accomplished women, have been subtly conditioned to think about intimate moments as primarily service-oriented experiences. They enter the space asking internally, "Am I doing this right? Does he like this? Is he satisfied?" This orientation, even when well-intentioned, places all the power and all the responsibility outside of yourself. It makes you reactive rather than directive. And reactive energy, as we've established, produces inconsistent, weakened technique. The hook method fundamentally rewrites this dynamic. When you understand, truly understand, that you are accessing and directing his nervous system's involuntary responses, something shifts at a very deep level. You are not trying to please him. You are extracting a specific response from his physiology using precision and knowledge that he doesn't possess. The shaking isn't something he gives to you. It's something you call out of him. That distinction is not semantic. It is the entire foundation of intimate empowerment. Think of yourself not as someone performing for his approval, but as someone operating a highly sophisticated instrument. You understand its mechanics. You know which strings produce which vibrations. You apply your technique with the quiet certainty of someone who has studied her craft. He becomes, in the most beautiful sense, entirely at the mercy of your knowledge and your hands. This power dynamic shift creates a confidence that he feels before you even touch him, in the way you move, the way you look at him, the way your hands land with absolute intention rather than tentative exploration. That confidence is magnetic. It creates the psychological safety necessary for full surrender. And full surrender is precisely the condition under which the shake response emerges most powerfully and most completely. Chapter 6, Mastery and Troubleshooting, Common Mistakes that Kill the Magic. Even with the best understanding of the technique, there are several predictable errors that consistently undermine results, and I want to walk you through each one specifically so that you can recognize and correct them the moment they appear. The first and most common mistake is going too fast. This one is deeply counterintuitive because speed feels like effort, and effort feels like doing more. But as we've established thoroughly by now, speed is the enemy of depth. A fast drag skims the surface, bypasses the deep receptor layers, and allows the nervous system to keep up with and adapt to the input. If you catch yourself accelerating, especially as his response builds and you feel excited, deliberately slow down. The slower you go at moments of high intensity, the more unbearable the sensation becomes for him. Use that knowledge. Lean into the slowness when every instinct tells you to move faster. The second critical mistake is losing hand frame. The moment your C shape collapses into flat fingers, the structural integrity of the entire technique dissolves. Your fingers need to maintain their curve and firmness throughout every drag and every pulse. Practice sustaining the shape through resistance. If you notice your fingers flattening, pause, reform the C deliberately, and continue. His body will feel the difference instantly. The third major error is ignoring feedback signals. The hook method is not a script to be executed on autopilot. It is a responsive, adaptive practice. If his breathing stays flat and his muscles don't shift, something in your application needs to adjust. Deeper pressure, slower pace, a different target zone, something needs to change. Staying locked into one approach when the signals aren't appearing is the hallmark of mechanical technique rather than true mastery. Stay present, stay responsive. The method tells you what it needs if you're paying attention, building intensity without overwhelming. There is an art to escalation, one that requires the same attention and calibration as the technique itself. The goal is to build intensity progressively, allowing his nervous system to open incrementally rather than slamming it with maximum pressure from the first touch. Think of it as tuning an instrument. You bring it slowly into resonance rather than forcing it into a frequency it isn't ready for. Begin every session with lighter applications of the hook method, a shallower C shape, a broader drag, a gentler pace. This serves two important functions. Neurologically, it begins warming up the deeper receptor layers and gradually raising his sensitivity baseline. Psychologically, it creates an expanding sense of anticipation. He begins to feel something different from the very first touch, and that difference builds a quiet, growing awareness that something significant is being built. As you feel his body beginning to respond, the breathing shifts, the micro tensions appearing, the subtle movements beginning, that is your signal to deepen. Increase the firmness of your hand formation, slow the drag further, extend the pause duration, introduce the pulse with greater deliberateness. Each escalation should feel like a natural progression, not a sudden gear change. His body should feel like it's being led deeper and deeper into sensation rather than pushed. Reading his limits is equally important. Full surrender requires complete trust, and trust is only possible when he feels safe. If tension patterns spike and hold without releasing, if his breath becomes short and tight rather than deep and opened, back off one level of intensity and hold there before rebuilding. This isn't weakness in your technique, it is sophisticated mastery. The most powerful experiences are the ones where he feels completely held while simultaneously completely overwhelmed. Integration with overall intimacy, the hook method, is extraordinary as a standalone technique, but its full transformative power emerges when it's woven into the larger fabric of intimate connection rather than applied as an isolated maneuver. Technique, divorced from emotional context, produces sensation. Technique, embedded in genuine intimacy, produces experiences that reshape his relationship to you at a neurochemical level. In the context of foreplay, the hook method serves beautifully as a sustained, escalating opening, a way of building full-body arousal and nervous system engagement before anything else begins. Using the neck, inner thigh, and lower abdomen applications during extended foreplay creates a whole-body priming effect that makes every subsequent sensation amplified. His nervous system is already opened and sensitized before the main experience even begins. During the full intimate experience, strategic application of hook method pauses, moments where you deliberately reintroduce the drag pause pulse on his thighs or stomach, creates waves of sensation that layer beautifully with everything else happening simultaneously. These moments don't interrupt the experience, they deepen it by reactivating nervous pathways across multiple zones at once. In post-intimacy moments, a slow, gentle version of the hook method applied to the neck, shoulders, or back activates the vagus nerve's calming pathways and supports the oxytocin release that deepens pair bonding. The transition from intense activation to gentle grounding touch tells his nervous system a complete story, one with a beginning, a peak, and a resolution. Complete experiences create complete memories, and complete memories are the ones that return to him again and again, pulling him back toward you with a pull he may not even be able to fully articulate. Chapter 7, Becoming Unforgettable, the Lasting Impact. The neurochemical bonding effect. What you've learned today is not just a technique for a single evening, it is an investment in a neurochemical bond that compounds over time in ways that are genuinely remarkable. When the body experiences intense pleasure, particularly the kind of full nervous system overload that the hook method produces, it triggers a significant release of oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. Oxytocin is not simply a feel-good chemical, it is the biological mechanism of attachment. Research from social neuroscience consistently shows that oxytocin released during shared intense physical experience creates positive associative memory at a neurological level, meaning his nervous system doesn't just remember that something felt good, it encodes you as the source of that intensity. Your touch, your presence, your energy become neurologically associated with the peak of what his body is capable of experiencing. Over repeated experiences, this association deepens into what researchers describe as a neural template, a deeply embedded pattern in which proximity to you, thoughts of you, or sensory memories of you trigger anticipatory neurochemical responses. In practical terms, this means he begins to crave you in a way that operates below conscious thought. It is not manipulation. It is the natural result of being the person who consistently unlocks his nervous system's deepest responses. You become associated with his most profound physical and emotional experiences. That association is extraordinarily difficult to replicate with someone else. You don't just become his preference. You become, at a biological level, irreplaceable. Your confident next steps. You came into this video knowing how to touch. You're leaving it knowing how to transform. That distinction is not small, and I want you to sit with it for a moment before you close this tab and go live your life. Your hands are not simply physical tools. They are conductors of energy, intention, and deep neurological knowledge. Every time you form that C shape with deliberate purpose, every time you execute that slow, certain drag against his skin, every time you hold the pause and let the anticipation build to something neither of you can contain, you are practicing a form of intimate mastery that most people never access in a lifetime of relationships. You now have that access. Use it with confidence. Start slowly. You don't need to execute every element of this method simultaneously on the first attempt. Choose one zone, practice the hand formation until it feels completely natural. Execute one slow drag with full intentionality. Watch what happens. Pay attention to the signals you've learned to read. Let the experience teach you in real time, because the most advanced skill is not perfection on the first attempt. It is the ability to stay present, stay responsive, and keep refining. As you become more comfortable with the foundations, begin layering in the psychological amplifiers, the eye contact, the verbal anchoring, the intentional power dynamic. Watch how the physical technique transforms when emotional presence and psychological certainty are added. Watch yourself become someone whose touch he thinks about when you're not in the room. There is so much more to explore. Advanced applications, combination techniques, and specific adaptations for different relationship dynamics, and I'll be covering all of it in upcoming content. So if this resonated with you, if something in here shifted your understanding of what you're truly capable of, stay connected, because we are just getting started, and the best is absolutely, completely still ahead. This script is intended for adult, educational, and relationship empowerment content. All physiological and neuroscience references are presented for educational context.